Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DaCosta, and this is Consistent Preterism. Happy Taco Tuesday to everybody today. Today, I wanted to follow up with yesterday's audio on Romans 11, where I talked about 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and how that ties in beautifully with Romans chapter 11 to show that those who were turning to the Lord were Israelites because they were contributing to all Israel being saved and all Israel being unblinded, if you will. But I wanted to take that a step further and tie in Romans 11 with John chapter 10, because I haven't done this before, and it's super, super powerful and super telling. Now, John chapter 10 is very interesting because it talks about Jesus being the true shepherd, which obviously, if you know anything about the Old Testament, especially in places like Ezekiel 31 to 34, that area, really uses the whole sheep and shepherd dynamic to describe Israel and their God. And it uses beasts of the field to describe nations devouring Israel. And there's a lot of imagery there using animals and such. But Israel always had these bad shepherds, right? And they would devour them. And the prophets would speak of them as casting Israel as sheep to the wolves and stuff like that. And they'd be devoured and eaten by the beasts. So they had these bad shepherds that didn't look out for Israel. That's the main motif of the Old Testament, the main focus. And here we have in the New Testament, we have this good shepherd, Jesus, who said he only comes for the lost sheep. And he's called the good shepherd here, or the true shepherd in John 10. But this whole chapter is basically about him being a shepherd and shepherding his sheep. And there's a lot of imagery there, but clearly we know who the sheep were, right? It was always Israel. So why would that change when we get to the New Testament? Why would a Chinaman become a sheep? It just doesn't make any sense. But what I want to do is I want to read Romans 11 again for you, and I want to tie John chapter 10 in with it. Romans 11 says this in verse 25, "Lest you be wise in your own sight, I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery, my brothers. Blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion, he will banish ungodliness from Jacob, and this will be my covenant with Jacob when I take away Jacob's sins." See, the whole focus there is on Jacob. It's on nobody else. The removing of the sins, the new covenant, it's all with Jacob. It's not with anyone else. But I want you to really take note of this. And I talked about this a lot yesterday in yesterday's audio. The fullness of the nations coming in would result in all Israel being saved. It says, and in this way, all Israel would be saved. In what way? By way of the fullness of the nations coming in. It says a partial hardening or a blindness in part has happened to Israel until the nations have come in. Those in the nations have come in. And in that way, all Israel would be saved. So the blindness couldn't go away in full until all the Israelites, both near and far, came in. And I want you to really remember that. And let's go over to John chapter 10 and let's see just how perfect this fits. John chapter 10, verse 7 says, Jesus said to them again, "Most assuredly I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief does not come except to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly." Here it is. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. Well, the good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. Well, elsewhere he said he only came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So do you see who the sheep are here? It's the house of Israel. He goes on in verse 12. He says, "But a hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and does not care about the sheep." Verse 14 says, "I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and I am known by my own. As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep." Now here is the key. Verse 16, check this out. He says, "And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd." Now, this is super, super important to pick up on because here Jesus is speaking to the Jews, okay? He's still, roaming around with the Jews. He's still, during his ministry, right? The nations hadn't come into play yet when he's saying this to them. Okay, and he's telling them, he's saying, I come for you. I come for the sheep, right? He told them elsewhere, I come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So they clearly know who he came for. But now he's speaking to them, the Jews, and he tells them here in verse 16, he says, and other sheep I have which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. Now, it's interesting that people like to try to argue that the mission wasn't for the nations from the beginning. It just kind of like changed. Like one bozo that used to argue with me said that in Acts chapter 7, everything changed in Acts 7, and Jesus decided he was going to start going to pagans and saving pagans. No. Jesus knew right from the beginning that the message was going to the nations. He knew from the beginning that he had Israelites out in the nations that he had to bring in, and this proves it. Just one of many places. He's telling the Jews here that he has sheep not of this fold. In other words, lost sheep outside of the boundaries of the Jewish system, if you will. Okay? Lost sheep that were sort of scattered abroad, not part of them. All right? And he says, them also I must bring. Well, they will hear my voice, he says. So he's basically, predicting that there's going to be this ingathering of sheep that exist outside of the boundaries of where these Jews were or what they worshiped or who they were as a system, as a religion. There's sheep out there scattered abroad, as the Bible words it elsewhere, and he's going to bring them in too. Well, folks, this is precisely what Romans 11 says. Romans 11 says that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the nations has come in, and in this way all Israel will be saved. Well, this is the same thing Jesus says here. Jesus essentially says the same thing, just words it differently. He says, I love my sheep will all come, they know me, I know them, they hear my voice, they will come, I will love them, I will protect them, I am the good shepherd. He says, and listen, Jews, I have sheep not of this fold. They too will come. They too will hear my voice. I will go seek them. So what is he saying? He's saying that the fullness of the nations has to come in because there's sheep out there. There's Israelite sheep, chosen elect individuals out in the nations, sheep not of this fold that must come. Folks, that is the fullness of the nations. That is what Romans 11 is speaking of. Romans 11 is saying blindness in part has happened to Israel. In other words, collective Israel as a whole. There was blindness over them, the true Israel of God. But that blindness would go away when all of them were brought in. Blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the nations has come in. In that way, all Israel was going to be saved. So I just wanted to show you very clearly there how John 10 confirms what Romans 11 says and what I.O. says that Romans 11 says. In John 10, you have Jesus speaking of other sheep outside of the Jewish fold that had to be brought in. In Romans 11, you hear Paul say that there's other sheep in the nations that had to be brought in. And when the fullness of those ones came in, all Israel would be saved. In other words, all the sheep would be saved. Well, I trust that was self-explanatory enough. I don't feel like I have to elaborate very much on it. I think it's an absolute dagger of a point, and you can just add it to the arsenal of I.O. material. Folks, I hope you all have a great day. If you enjoyed it, give it a like. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and we'll catch you on that flip side. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.